But like I said, Steven's film is a remake. And the original movie version of War of the Worlds came out in the 50s. No less impressive. Considered to be one of the greatest science fiction films of the 1950s and really of cinematic history, in my opinion, this science fiction film starred Gene Barry and Robinson. And it won an Oscar for incredible special effects. And it was later selected for inclusion in the National Film Registry of the Library of Congress. So other people think it's pretty cool too. You know, what's interesting, the novel's characters, the aliens in the original novel are bear-sized, small, bulkish creatures whose bodies are described as merely heads with a beak-like mouth, 16 tentacles into 2 groupings of 8, and 2 luminous disc-like eyes. Due to budget constraints, the film counterparts are short, reddish-brown creatures with 2 long, thin arms and 3 long, thin fingers with these suction cup tips. You're not actually seeing the aliens. Those are the spaceships of the aliens, and the aliens are inside there. And the plot of the film, the original, is very different from the novel, both of them actually. The novel tells the story of a 19th century journalist with additional narration made by his brother in later chapters, who journeys through Victorian London and its environments while the Martians attack, kind of like that picture we saw earlier. However, certain points of the film's plot are similar to the novel, from the crash landing of the Martian meteor ships to their eventual defeat, and I won't tell you how or why. I think I just gave a little bit of a spoiler away. But, I mean, this movie came out in 1950, so, you know, sometimes we got to talk about a spoiler if it's, 70 years old? The disintegration effect took 144 separate matte paintings to create. The aliens can disintegrate people. They do it in the Tom Cruise version. They do it in this version. The sound effects of the war machine's heat rays firing were actually created by mixing the sound of 3 electric guitars being recorded backwards. That's fun. Check this out from 1950s version of War of the Worlds. And as you take a look at this, consider the differences between the 2 versions.
You don't want to know what I was thinking? If we could gather all the energy expended in just one square dance, we could send that meteor back to where it came from.
Well, our very first shot in the movie was a location shot. And we went to Phoenix, Arizona, because the National Guard was on bivouac, I believe is what you call it. And we needed tanks. And we needed action. And so we were flown there. It was raining, it was muddy, it was cold, it was miserable. And when those tanks ran, they didn't stop and start for us. Gene Barry and I had to run around and dodge all those things.
The effects had to be put in alive. Falling beams, burning beams. We did some of the actual footage. We built these big containers that was at the top of the street and all worked on a button, and it opens up. So they can time it so that it comes right on the back of the double or the actor that's doing it. Burning embers, smoke coming, and wind. It's all done with a lot of help for some very good people working for doing the special effects.
Yeah, George Pal produced wonderfully strange, different kind of movies. Movies that had physical accomplishments in them that had to be done, and he did them. He made them happen. Magic. He brought a magic to the screen.
George knew what he wanted. He was on the set quite often, but he wasn't one to be always looking over somebody's shoulder. He let things flow. He let the director get out of the actors what he felt was right for the part.
Mr. Haskins would laugh and he'd say, "All right, Ann, which frightening look shall we have you do today?"
Everybody knew pretty well what Byron wanted. And if Byron didn't get what he wanted, we would do it over again, fill everything up, and start from scratch.
Haskin had a tremendous knowledge of special effects. He had a really marvelous collaboration with Pal. They apparently got along well, at least when they were working together.
Well, the locations were difficult only in the fact that you're in the middle of Los Angeles and you're showing an exodus of hundreds of people, packs on their back, cars overloaded. We worked on Sundays. most of the shots made down through the streets of Los Angeles because we had more control. The policemen had an easier chance of blocking the streets, and we wanted some of the shots to look desolate with nothing but some wind and a piece of paper going through, and that gave the picture the mood it was in. Also, at the back lot of Paramount, we had a good street, so that was one where we could really stage the fights of them being knocked through, men, windows going, at the height of the excitement.
It is some of the most gorgeous three-strip Technicolor you'll ever see. So saturated, so deep.
It will never fade. The colors are magnificent. A Technicolor camera is huge. It's the size of a person. And you have to cover it with heavy, heavy matting because you have 3 strips of film going through, and it's very noisy. Very, very noisy. I don't know why you can't, and maybe you can, or they were able to get rid of the sound, but why it wasn't recorded is beyond me.
Most of this picture was made in the back lot of Paramount and on stages 18. 18 was a double stage that could take the middle of it out and make a lot more room to work, and that's where the sets were built.
Al Nozaki was probably one of the finest art directors around. I mean, he was really a visionary guy, and he's the one that came up with the saucers, sort of the manta ray look, and then the sort of cobra head thing, because they wanted to see about doing the tripod machines. George wanted to do that originally and do it in this puppetoon style, and Paramount said, "That's too much money. We can't do it. You've got to come up with something else."
This could cost 10 times as much. Imagine destruction all over the world. The Nuke have done the things like that.
And so Al came up with this, I think, brilliant designs. I mean, those saucers are beautiful. And being a manta ray, they're kind of scary right away. Cobra heads, cobras are scary. So it had all the elements, only it was a mechanical thing.
My daughter, she claims that she's the one that designed the Martian machine. Too then, but she's designed, she's helped me in a lot of ways, so I guess that was one of them.
Now, what you're seeing here is the close-up of the Cobra eye of the Martian war machine. Now, this particular machine was not in the original film. They had 3 of them in the original film. They were made of copper and had all kinds of electronics in here, and the green things glowed, all the windows and stuff glowed. And this was made for the TV series that they did a few years ago. And so this is just made of fiberglass. And a sad story about the original ones that were made of copper, they gave them to a copper drive, a Boy Scout copper drive, and they were melted down, and so they don't exist.
I did get to go on stage 18 and watch them glide. It was silent. And these magnificent copper machines were just gliding above you, all across the soundstage. It was quite eerie and very, very impressive.
There were like 20 wires hanging from these things, some of them to make the electronics work in there, because in the saucers themselves, they had electronics where the things would glow green, the Cobra head that would actually pulsate, and they were made out of copper and had all the mechanism, and they were fairly heavy.
See, the wires were painted blue so that it would not show up on the screen, but some people have maintained they could see the wires pretty well.
When they fired the ray, they took an acetylene torch against black and with a fan, and they would match it up to where the ship was supposed to be or the Cobra head was supposed to be, and they would hit the acetylene with a fan and blow it out, and that's what you saw when that ray came out, which is really kind of brilliant. You think about it.
I remember coming on the set and looking up at this enormous Cobra head, and I said, "What in God's name is that?" And somebody flipped a switch, and that thing came on. Scared the devil out of me. I jumped a mile.
There's a scene later where they make these blisters, and they're like domes. And what they literally did there, they just took glass domes and shot them against black and supered them right over the saucers. Because to make a dome big enough for a saucer that's 3.5 feet across, that would have been a pretty darn big dome. Charlie Gamora, who was one of the all-time great makeup artist guys and also one of the best gorilla men in the business. He created Al Nozaki design this Martian guy. First glimpse you get of it is where they're looking through a hole in the wall and you see him go by, and it really looked, whoa, that's creepy.
When they brought the Martian on the set the very first time, he was enormous and far too big than whatever George Pal had anticipated, and they had to use it the next day. Well, Charles Gamora and his daughter, she was only 12 at the time, they went home and worked on that thing all night long.
Basically, we had to start from square one. And that meant that we had to build the armature, and we had to wire the head in, and we put chicken wire around the armature. We put plaster bandages over that, leaving the back open because Charlie knew that he had to work the monster now.
Charlie would kneel inside of it, and he could put his hands into the arms. They came about to the elbows of the Martian, and he had little pull rods that he could pull, and that made the fingers do this. And that's that one scene where you see a hand come in to grab Ann Robinson.
The monster's arms was made for an over 6 monster. So now we have to work these huge arms into this very small body. We pulled the old latex off the old monster and layer it on first, and then start putting new layers on over it, and this is beginning to really start looking opaque and real. And I'm going, this is real. This is really looking real. Even I'm thinking this is looking real.
And they wanted a 3-eye system in it, so it had a round eye, but it was red, green, and blue inside of this thing.
And he's realizing as he puts the eye in that now the wires can't go along the side. They have to go up and over the head for freedom of movement. So this is where the veins in the head were totally a last-minute idea. As it gets close to dawn, we're realizing it's the deadline. And this Martian has not cured and is falling apart right before our eyes. We're wondering if this is going to hold up through the shot. But what are you going to do? So it's just a little more wet, pat, smush, mush, and hope that it doesn't show. But if you look very carefully, you can see the tape unwinding on the arms of the Martian.
Diana, who was just a teenager at the time, was under the stage floor with little squeeze bottles making the veins pulsate inside the head.
Charlie is listening for cues on his own. He's trying to get the prop man to go this way, that way, faster, not so fast, stop, go, left, right, pump, 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 pump. All this is going on at the same time.
The prop guy had him on wires and pulled him, and darn near pulled Charlie and the whole thing over when it went out of the scene. I mean, it really goes out fast because he's going out waving the arms like crazy, and the back was open, and the guy pulled him so fast he darn near fell out of the thing.
You'll see that he's going like this. He almost fell over, and we knew if that Martian fell, it would be a disaster. It would have been just a blood blob on the floor. With tape and wood and chicken wire. It would have just splattered.
The best look you get of it is the arm at the end when it comes out and it dies.
Charlie Gomorrah was on the other end of the arm blowing into it too. And so it was pulsating. And then as the Martian died, we changed the color from red to green, slowed down the heartbeat, sucked all the air out. And that's all we did. No computer had to do that.
And it was something you'd never seen before, ever. And in Charlie's great sculpting abilities to be able to pull this thing off and make it work is pretty unique.
It started a whole new genre of filmmaking that we're still profiting from today and that I'm able to tell you about 50 years later. And so the contributions that Charlie made ring out to this day. And even though nobody knew his name,
after the filming was all over with, I went back on to see the miniatures, which was absolutely breathtaking because they weren't little, they were large. The City Hall had to be, between 8, 10, 12 feet tall. Men were on ladders to get to the top of it to get the beacon, to work.
The miniature sets were very interesting in the work that went into them because they were exact duplicates in miniature of the buildings that we were trying to say was in the picture.
Well, I think the miniatures probably in War of the Worlds are some of the best I'd ever seen, especially at the time. I mean, they hold up today even, but the miniatures are great. They built, parts of Los Angeles, whole streets of Los Angeles in miniature.
It looked like Gulliver's Travels, quite frankly. It looked like it just would have come to life any minute.
shooting miniatures, you have to be able to close your lens down so you get a very small aperture, and that allows very sharp focus from the very foreground in front of the camera to the very back of the set. So you have to be able to close the lens down. That means you need a lot of light.
The thing that people don't remember nowadays were the tremendous arc lights they had. They had two filaments that would come together and they'd set them on fire inside, and they were carbon. They would burn outward. They were somewhere between 2,000 and 5,000, arc of power of heat. You couldn't stand anywhere near them. And this is one thing I'll never forget, when you'd always say cut, you'd hear somebody say, "Save the arcs."
And there it comes again.
George Powell and Pete Freeman have cameos in the film during the radio broadcast montage. They're two bums standing by a radio.
Suppose they are Martians, Professor. What would they look like? Bigger than us? Smaller?
There were only two scenes that I recall that were eliminated. One where I was lying in Gene Barry's arms, and there's something about his tie as I awaken that remind me of my Uncle Matthew. And then suddenly I start reminiscing about Uncle Matthew, but that was eliminated. I don't know why. Maybe it just wasn't necessary. The other one was when we're climbing out of the farmhouse, and he's shaking me. He says, "Don't worry, we're going to get out of this somehow." Well, the theater just fell on the floor laughing, so they cut that out. Those are the only two scenes that I recall that were eliminated from the film.
The end came swiftly. All over the world, their machines began to stop and fall. After all that men could do had failed, the Martians were destroyed and humanity was saved by the littlest things which God in his wisdom had put upon this earth.
George is considered the father of sci-fi films, and he pretty much is, because he was the first one to really do sci-fi films that got a name.
But it did prove to be the kind of supreme story of alien invasion in the cinema.
At the time, it was another job, another acting job, and until I got into it, I didn't realize how good it was and how important it was.
War of the Worlds, unfortunately, did not have a premiere. It should have. When you see this picture behind me, I took in Times Square on the day it opened over 50 years ago in New York City. You could see that the lines around the block are enormous.